Software for the mind. The Recorded Book Corporation is proud to present Stuart Wilde's important and omniscient collection, The Mastery of Life series.
Hello, this is Stuart Wilde. Welcome to our two-tape series on the subtle art of negotiation. In this series, we're basically going to look at how to position yourself strongly in relation to all of the negotiations that you may conduct in the course of, let's say, your business affairs, and also to understand that basically everything that you look at in the world is negotiable. But before we start the tapes, let me tell you just a little bit about my background in the subject. I was brought up in Africa, and at the age of approximately 10 years old, I was shipped off to a boarding school in England, this sort of mausoleum of a place that I was incarcerated in for 7-odd years. And because my mother and father lived in Africa, I naturally only saw them for like a few weeks every year in the summer. And so as a young boy of 10, I found myself literally having to fend for myself at a very, very early age. In fact, while I was at school, I developed certain businesses within that boarding school. I sort of started distributing cigarettes and girly magazines and whatever anybody at the school needed in order to turn a few bob, because it wasn't long after I'd got to school that I sort of experienced my first cash flow crunch. And I looked around me, and of course, with my mother and father being thousands and thousands of miles away in Africa, I needed to somehow resolve my dilemma incredibly quickly. And so I began to look around and began to evaluate what were the emotional needs of my fellow boarders. And of course, when you're buying and selling anything, that's what you're really looking at. You're looking at the emotional needs of the people that you're serving, or the emotional content. Because, in fact, money is actually only a measure of emotion. And I'll talk more about that later on in this tape. After I left school, I went into Carnaby Street, London, and it was the period of the swinging 60s when British rock bands were doing incredible business all over the world, and the Beatles were at the height of their fame at that time. And I drifted into the clothing business. And again, I was involved in learning about life, learning about money and negotiations very, very rapidly. And I suppose I had a natural talent for it, because I sort of had a natural sort of street smartness about myself. But I realized that in every negotiation, or in every sort of financial transaction, what you're looking to do at the very beginning is to place yourself upon the high ground. And as you control more and more the way that you react emotionally to money, or not having money, or doing a deal or not doing the deal, or the circumstances of a transaction, it's the way that you position yourself in the transaction that gives you power or makes you weak. By the time I was 20, or just past my 20th birthday, I was doing really, really well in the clothing business, and I was making approximately, I would say in Australian dollars, $30,000 a week. And I became very wealthy very, very quickly. And then it was a matter of trying to hold on to that money, or trying to invest it in a sensible way. And again, I was involved in more and more negotiations. I've traveled all over the world. I've been approximately 70 times around the world, or I've done the equivalent mileage of 70 times around the world. And as I've traveled and negotiated and worked in different countries, obviously I've discovered that people have very different styles of negotiating, or very different styles of belief patterns. But I think that the whole crux to the idea of negotiating and the subtlety that lays in there is the same for everybody. And so this tape series deals mostly with the whole idea of how do you get power, or how do you structure your troops to the high ground so that when you get into the battle of daily life, you have all of your guns blazing. I don't think it's vital that you win every single negotiation or every single conflict or every single confrontation of your life. I just think it's important that you win most of them. And if you do win most of them, then in the end, you're bound to come out with a profit and you're bound to live an abundant and rich and rewarding lifestyle. I think the first thing that we have to look at when we look at negotiating is, what do you actually want? When you're clear about what you want out of life, the kind of messages you give out are concise and precise, and it's almost like life gives you back whatever it is that you put out. I genuinely believe that one's reality is created by one's inner thoughts and feelings. And so if we put out weakness, we get weakness. If we put out confusion, the events around us are not very cohesive, and so the reality we experience is not cohesive and tight. I think the first point about looking at the long-term structure of your life is to really sit down with yourself one day and have a little pencil and a paper or something and jot down those goals or those things that you want to achieve in life. What do I want to get out of it? Many people have the ability to make large sums of money. The thing is that once they have that money, they're not very guarded or not very sort of sensible about how they dispense money. When you look, let's say, for example, at the price of a refrigerator in a store, you'll go into the store and you'll see this refrigerator marked at, let's say, $500. When you look at that price, what you're really looking at is the thought form or the emotion that the seller has placed upon that refrigerator. Basically speaking, the value of things is very arbitrary. Nothing in the world really has a value. We have, let's say, minerals and oils and manufactured goods and roads and services that we perform for each other, but what they are actually worth is up for discussion. And price is always basically a factor of emotion. If a lot of people, let's say, emotionally need refrigerators, the price of refrigerators goes up. If there's very little, let's say, emotion for refrigerators, and you happen to live, let's say, in Greenland or something, and you don't need a refrigerator because you can toss your eggs and your fish out in the snow, then obviously the price of refrigerators would go down. And so when you look at the real world and you look at, let's say, the price structures, or you look at the status quo, you have to understand that that is just an agreement. It is just only a thought form. What happens is that because of the way we educate our children and because of the way that morality develops in a society, we tend to think that anything that is printed or written or anything that has a kind of an official look to it is absolutely cast in stone, that can't be changed. As you look at the subtle art of negotiating, the very first thing that you're going to want to put in your feelings or into your consciousness is that everything is negotiable. The fact that that sign says $500 doesn't mean anything. Who's to say that the reality of the refrigerator salesperson or the man selling the refrigerator is any more, let's say, correct or right than your reality? You can walk into a store and you can say, well, I appreciate that your reality says that this refrigerator is worth $500, but my reality says it's only worth $50, and so I would like to offer you $50. However, because of our programming, that is usually like a very uncomfortable thing to do. We are taught as young children and as young citizens to follow along, obey laws, do as we are told. And so when we see a written sign on the road that says slow down, we automatically slow down. We don't think in terms of, well, I wonder who put that sign up, or what is the law about that sign, or why is that sign there? And we're constantly reading instructions or following instructions as we move through daily life. And many of those instructions are just put up because somebody somewhere decides, oh, well, I'll just stick this sign up. So we read all of these signs that say things like, don't park here, or don't do this there, or queue here, or wait here, or pay 10 cents there, or whatever it is. And we follow along almost like as if we're asleep, what I call TikTok. And so as we walk along in this sort of slightly sort of like half asleep state of TikTok, we're lulled into conforming and complying with everything. We follow all sorts of rules and regulations and instructions that really are nothing to do with us. They're just the idea that somebody has put up and we follow along. So I think the very first part of negotiating is to begin to get yourself comfortable with the idea that your reality is as important, if not more important, than other people's reality. I believe that you're here on the earth plane to understand your evolution, to become a powerful person, and that if you do become powerful, you can serve humanity from a point of power. most of the people in the world are weak. And the reason they are weak is because they don't have a very, very powerful sense of their own identity. They don't have a powerful sense of a purpose in life, and they don't concentrate upon themselves. They concentrate upon everything else. So as you tend to put your consciousness outside of yourself, let's say, for example, worrying about what people think of you, worrying about what society thinks of you, status, the class system, dealing with the opinions of the people that they may or may not have about you, you tend to kind of lose your power and you lose yourself because you're constantly trying to accommodate all and sundry, and everybody will have a different opinion as to how you should act, and they will advise you in different ways, and you're constantly in this very confused state of who am I, where am I going, and what do I want? I think the first exercise in the negotiating, to get yourself into a sort of a state of understanding how negotiation works, is to go into a store and pick, let's say, a high-ticket item, let's say like a television or a refrigerator or what, and walk in and talk to the salesman for a couple of minutes and then offer him half price. So if it's a $1,000 TV set, you would offer him $500. And then if he gets angry or upset or starts to sort of insult you or gets rude or tells you you're a nutcase or whatever, begin to watch your reactions. Are you going through embarrassment? Do you feel like less than best? Do you feel belittled by his anger? What we're looking to do is to try to create an individual that is so centered and powerful inside their own reality that they are not reacting to the reality of other people. What a person believes about you or says about you or thinks about you is a part of their evolution. It's a part of their consciousness. What you believe about yourself is a part of your consciousness. The thought forms of others have absolutely nothing to do with you. And so when you can allow people to, let's say, get angry, or you can allow them to let's say, react to you emotionally, and you in turn are totally calm and centered within who you are, where you're going, and what your purpose in life is, then you can begin to establish yourself as a powerful negotiator. Many people complain of not having enough money. And yet, if you look at the nitty-gritty of how much they earn, the money they've made from investments, the money they've inherited, and so on, you can see that they've actually received in the course of their lifetime vast sums of money that would make them very, very comfortable and very opulent and give them a rich lifestyle. What they've done is they've used that money poorly, and they haven't basically spread it out or worked with it to its most effectiveness. The same way as, let's say, for example, nature gives us, let's say, one harvest a year through which we have to sort of exist for 12 months. It's the same with the abundance of life, or abundance of the universal law, as I call it. You receive all of this cash, and yet when we receive money, we have a way of sort of frittering it or getting rid of it without properly, parceling it or apportioning it to our various needs. And so the first thing we're looking at is to understand that when you look at the status quo, when you look at the morality of the world, when you look at the way that things are structured, you have to understand that those things are structured for the benefit of the people that do the structuring. They are not structured for the benefit of the individual. And so no one has your interests at heart. The shop that sells refrigerators really doesn't give a damn about you. All it wants is your $500. It's the same way with the way that, let's say, governments operate. And they may pretend to operate for the benefit of the people, but in the end, they operate for the benefit of the people that are in government. They operate for the benefit of politicians. They operate for, let's say, the benefit of power and how to use power. And so above us, or people that are in authority, constantly, let's say, decide for us what it is they want, and they maneuver us into those positions. You have a reality, and that reality is truth to you. The truth that other people have is their reality. And it's fine for your reality and their reality to be in opposition. You do not have to agree with people, and they do not have to agree with you. I think that when there is disagreement, it is best to stay away from conflict. But I think also, if you can get very centered in your individuality, then you can be happy to allow people to believe whatever they want to believe. If this man believes this refrigerator is worth $500, I honor his decision to believe it. In my reality, it's worth $50. If you want to take $50, I'll hold the refrigerator out. If you don't want to take $50, it's my pleasure to leave it here, and I honor your decision to continue to try to sell it at $500. You do not have to meet other people's expectations of you. You don't have to agree with them, and you don't have to comply in order for them to like you. When you can detach from whether people like you or don't like you, when you can detach from all of the manipulation that they impose upon you, you can begin to establish freedom in your life. It's not only, let's say, a spiritual freedom or a psychological freedom, but it is an actual freedom, because all of your personality becomes liberated by the fact that you're not acting to accommodate other people. You're acting for yourself. Now, I'm not suggesting that you become some kind of self-centered ogre that never listens to anybody or never is never kind or loving or caring for other people. But basically speaking, the way you garner power to yourself is to become very centered in what it is you want and to move towards that goal. The more you know who you are and where you're going, the more you put out into the universal law a clear message of, I wish to achieve this in this period of time, and then I'm going to go on and achieve that, and that. You'll become that person by the very centeredness and concentration that you exhibit. I remember listening to a tape on negotiation in the United States, and it was recorded by some eminent gent who's considered to be an authority on negotiation. And I bought this tape a few years ago, and the first sort of 95% of the tape discussed the idea of a sort of a win-win situation. In other words, negotiations whereby both parties wound up being satisfied or wound up winning. And that is a very common sort of philosophical idea that somehow, some way, everybody's got to be happy. However, whereas I don't necessarily disagree with win-win, I don't think that you came to the earth plane to make people happy. If they're happy with you, then that's neat. But if they're not happy, then that is a factor of their own life, their own emotional or psychological reaction to you. I'm not saying go around and be mean to people, but I think the whole idea of win-win is actually a weakening process for you, because it forces you to spend time thinking about what the other person wants or accommodating them in some way, rather than centering upon what you want. And if you center upon you want, that doesn't necessarily mean that the other person isn't going to get what they want. Obviously, certain negotiations or certain business transactions are on a one-off basis. If you're selling, let's say, hot dogs, downtown Sydney, a person walks up to you and they buy the hot dog, you're not trying to develop a relationship with them, and therefore the whole concept of win-win isn't so important. If you have, say, a corporation and you're negotiating with a supplier, then you're looking at a long-term relationship, and then, of course, win-win would become more important, because you both want to be satisfied and you want the deal or the relationship to continue. However, I think that we can get incredibly lost in this whole win-win idea if we don't center upon ourselves and what we want first. And then that can be modified to ensure that the other parties to the negotiation get not necessarily all that they want, but enough to satisfy them to continue in the relationship with us. If you look at negotiations, they divide up into three major categories. There are financial negotiations. There are negotiations of an emotional content or emotional basis, which often take place in our interpersonal relationships or in our family relationships. And then there are negotiations that I call circumstantial, where, say, for example, you are trying to win for yourself, or you're trying to gather for yourself the most powerful circumstances, or the most comfortable circumstances. That would be, let's say, for example, negotiating for the best table in a restaurant, or negotiating for a good seat on an aircraft, or whatever it might be. As we look at the way everything is structured, we cannot come into life without there having been somebody before us. And so it's not like we walk into a city and nothing has ever been put down. All of the structures are laid there, and we arrive basically as a baby, and then as a young adolescent, and as an adult, and we enter into a structure where we basically have to negotiate a position for ourselves. Whether it's negotiating, say, for example, a position in a corporation, or negotiating something with your family as to who does the washing up or who doesn't, or negotiating, getting a parking place, downtown or whatever it is. And so we're constantly having to push up against a structure that was previously imposed or laws that were previously imposed. What we have to do then is to understand that we have a right to position ourselves in society at any level that we wish and at any terms that we wish. The very fact that it may have been laid out for the last 25 years that this parking spot belonged to so-and-so doesn't necessarily mean that next week it's going to belong to him. There's nothing stopping you taking control of that parking lot and making it your own, so to speak. As we look at that, we constantly bump up against this unwillingness that we have to, let's say, change the old order. Society demands that we conform, and society demands that we basically pay through the nose to sustain society. How many times, say, have you gone to, let's say, a very expensive restaurant and sort of splashed your money about in order to sort of feel that you were worthwhile, in order for you to feel, hey, I can spend this money, I can pay, over the top for stuff because it helps me feel important or it helps me feel worthwhile. As we look at this whole introduction to negotiating, one of the things that I want you to consider is, how do you value your self-worth? In the physical plane, most people consider like how much money, how many assets they have as this quantifiable, measurable sort of thing that describes their worth. As you look at yourself as a powerful individual, the very first thing that I want you to do is to begin to look at your worth separate from your wealth or your lack of wealth. You have worth that comes from your intrinsic humanhood. You have worth from your comedy, from your lifestyle, from the way that you experience being alive. And so as you can detach from the total amount of finances that you have, and you can say, I have a worth that is separate to that, then all of a sudden, all the emotion involved in how much money you have, or how well you do in a negotiation, or what price you pay or don't pay, becomes basically removed one step backwards, and so you can look at things objectively. Let us say that all the wealth you have is inside a circle, and that circle is worth, let's say, 100 units. As the marketplace changes, or as emotions changes, that circle or your assets may go up to 110 units. And it's usual then for us to feel, oh gosh, I'm progressing, I'm doing well, I'm a better person because my lump of stuff has gone up 10%. However, when markets change and your circle goes down 10% or your assets go down 10%, there's this strange feeling of disquiet, isn't it? This strange feeling of, oh gosh, I'm not such a good person as I was yesterday because my shares have gone down, 5 points or 10 points or whatever. And so what I want you to do is to think in terms of your life having real worth, having importance, having meaning, separate from assets and finances, which again, to repeat, are just a measure of emotion. If you happen to own something that people emotionally need, then I suppose we would say that your assets were increasing. If you own things that people do not emotionally need, then your assets would be decreasing. However, how does that affect what you feel about yourself? And so as we look at all of this, we're looking at this development of this powerful sense of self-image and a powerful sense of not acting or not being manipulated by everything into having to be one thing or another. I think what's important is that you are strong. Isn't it true that, like, for example, think of a friend or an associate that, let's say, you work with that is basically weak. When dealing with them, there's always this sense of uncomfortableness. And the uncomfortableness comes because we subliminally or actually or psychologically evaluate their weakness and we see them as weak. And when you see a person as weak, there's a part of you that feels, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to support this person, or I'm going to have to help them, or I'm going to have to lend them money, or any minute now they're going to want something. And it's always a joy and delight to find a person that is strong without them being brash or boastful or let's say pompous in their strength. But it's pleasing to be with people that are strong, that are creative, because you have this relaxed sense of, oh gosh, they don't want anything from me. They're not going to start hitting me up for $10 or something like that. And so what I think is important is that the whole of your life be focused around developing strength. Once you're strong, negotiation after that becomes incredibly easy because your power, your inner power, will be greater than the inner power of those people that you're transacting with. And so when your power is stronger, it'll be automatic that you'll be able to put yourself in a situation where you get what you want. The more you get involved in, let's say, understanding yourself, the more, let's say, you become clear about who you are, the more you look within yourself, whether that's through prayer or meditation or altered states of consciousness or jogging in the early morning or whatever way you spend time with yourself, the more you understand the psychology of life. And when you can understand what people's emotional needs are, then when they come to the negotiating table of life, you know what they're going to say next. You know which direction they're going to go, and you can position your strengths, your troops, your battalions to sort of answer whatever they're going to be coming up with. Most people do not understand other people, and yet as you become centered in understanding yourself, then to look at a person and to understand, let's say, for example, where is the pain in their life? Where are the needs? Where are the insecurities? It'll be simple for you to position yourself to provide that for them. Any time that you can provide for the emotional needs of other human beings, you will do very, very well financially, and you will also feel that you have served a purpose in life in assisting people to move through whatever their problems are, whatever their needs are. And so we're looking at, first and foremost, establishing this inner strength, almost like an inner solitude, where you can say to yourself, I am what I am, and what other people perceive of me, that's their business. I have my goals, the goals that are important to me, my loved ones, those things that I wish to acquire, or those experiences that I wish to purchase in life. And those things are important to me. If and after that has been established, I can then serve humanity in some way, or I can assist in some way, all well and good. But before or until I am strong, I realize that there's very little that I can do to impact the world or make it a better place to live in. And so that, to me, is the key. The whole key is this powerful energy of knowing you are an individual and pushing up against the status quo without confronting it. Certain negotiations are like absolutely taboo. You're just not allowed to negotiate. Try negotiating a parking fine or something and going in there and saying, sorry guys, I don't want to pay $20, will you take $2? Or there's all sorts of things that we're just not allowed to negotiate. We're sort of manipulated or we're legislated into having to conform. But I think it's important to even push against those taboo negotiations. And one little exercise that I'd like you to consider, just for a little laugh, is next time a tramp comes up to you in the street and tries to, let's say, bludge 20 cents for a cup of tea, try getting a buck off him. Try saying to him, excuse me, mate, but why don't you lend me a buck back? Or when somebody rattles a little can under your nose and says, do you want to give some money to the starving millions? Try asking them, or try getting them to lend you $5 out of the can, Say, look, never mind about the starving millions. I haven't had lunch. Could you give me $5? Naturally, or more than likely, they won't. But it's a way of you affirming that the status quo is not necessarily sacrosanct. It's not necessarily the way everybody says it is. And by pushing up against that and inventing other ways for you to negotiate against these things that are supposed to be laid down, cast in stone, been there since the beginning of time, it allows you to have almost this comedy in your life of being this individual that's almost slightly loony, that tries to, cadge dollars off tramps and tries to borrow money off the lady with a charity tin. But at least you're looking at trying to establish an alternative reality or an alternative philosophy for life. And as you come out of the mindset that everybody else holds, if you come out of the mindset that is so much a part of what I call TikTok, which is this sort of sleep state that the world exists in, then as you come out of that, you drop into an originality. And that originality will be priceless to you in years down line as you begin to look at the hidden meaning of things, the hidden feelings. You begin to develop a kind of ESP about how you deal with society, how you deal with negotiations. And I think that is vital, and it will assist you greatly.
This is the end of the side. Please fast forward. Side 2.
As we look at the subtle art of negotiation, I want you to think in terms of the word profit, P-R-O-F-I-T. Each one of the letters of that word are one of the components that you're going to want to have in your negotiations in order for you to come out of the psychological high ground. P stands for the psychology of negotiation, R for the relationships, your interaction with those people that are in the negotiation with you, the buyer or the seller, depending upon your position. O is for the originality. F is for feet, and I'll explain that to you later. It's feet as in hands and feet. I is for information, and T is for time or timing. Let us start with feet. The most important factor in any negotiation is your ability to use your feet and walk away. It is that emotional detachment that allows you power. Any time that you can't walk away from a negotiation, any time where you have to complete the purchase or you have to marry the girl or whatever it is, it does not allow you freedom. And so I feel that in the word profit, all of those titles, feet is the most important. When you can create a detachment from being in the deal or not being in the deal, you are free. I worked for a while in London as a jobber in the clothing industry, and I had a partner. And we would go around factories and so on, buying up remnants and sort of, overstocks and misproductions and seconds and that kind of thing. And it was a very, very profitable business. But when I first started the business with my partner, he would spend about 2 or 3 minutes in the car park prior to, let's say, entering a factory, talking to me about how much we did not want the deal and how we would do well to walk away. And he always said to me, Stuart, he says, we make money from the ones we leave on the floor. And I must say that at the beginning, I didn't really understand that concept. But down the line, I realized that any time a deal was marginal, or any time there was some kind of confrontation or difficulty or confusion inside the deal, if we pushed and harried and followed through and did the deal regardless, it almost always cost us money. And so when you're looking at negotiating, you need to design a battle plan or an approach to how this negotiation is going to take place. But you also absolutely have to design an exit. You don't want to commit your troops into an ambush in the valley. And so when you're going into the deal, you need to be able to say to yourself in your own emotions and feelings, this deal is important to me, but if I don't get what I want or I don't get the price I want, I'm happy to walk away. The difficulty is that we tend to, through ego, lock ourselves into only one mindset that says, I have to have that building at any cost. And so once we go into a negotiation like that, we tend to pay any cost for it. And so we wind up with this building that we've wound up paying much too much for because we weren't in a position to understand that we had the freedom to walk away. It's never wrong to walk away. It's never wrong to allow something to be released from your life. And the reason why it isn't wrong is because, first of all, if things aren't flowing, if things aren't coming together, there's obviously an imbalance in the situation. And if there is an imbalance at the front end when the negotiation is going down, let's say there's tremendous arguments and people banging their fists on the table and so on, that should be to you a warning that you're not supposed to be there. I believe that if you are in balance, you are always in the right place at the right time. And so if you find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time and everybody's at your throat about, let's say, the price of this building that you're trying to buy, there's something that you need to look at. You need to say to yourself, why am I here? Why am I with these people that are angry with me? Why isn't this coming together? Why is the opposition or the seller being so awkward? Why are there so many obstacles in the way? I know that many philosophies say that when confronted with a problem, you're supposed to sort of like plow at it headlong. But I think that if you do, you spend so much of your life banging your head against a wall. in trying to push through resistances, there's a tendency to sort of carry on regardless, like this sort of soldier marching towards the machine guns of the enemy. And I'm not into that philosophy at all. I think that if you find or if you come upon a major resistance, you need to pull back and take a look at it and say, what does this mean? Obviously, some negotiations involve huge sums of money and are very complex, and there's like miles and piles of mumbo-jumbo and legalese in them, and there's a tendency for obstacles to occur. But generally speaking, if something is going to be concluded in a satisfactory way, there has to be a congruence or meeting of minds, and usually if there is a meeting of minds, then the minor details just sort of fall into place. And so that's the first thing that I want you to look at. The second part of walking away is that there isn't a deal that you've ever done in your life where you couldn't have done a better deal across the street the following day. I don't care what price you paid for something, there's always somebody somewhere that's selling the same product or a comparable product slightly cheaper. And so if you walk away from a deal, rather than feeling that your ego has been bashed up and somehow you're not a good person because you didn't conclude the deal, or you wasted a week or a day or 6 months negotiating it, just realize or stand inside the affirmation that says, okay, I didn't get this deal, but the power that took me to that deal, that force inside of myself, that concentrated, let's say, direction of my will naturally pull to me another deal. And whereas I didn't buy this building, there's a million of them within 200 miles of where I stand right now that I could buy. As you create this detachment, then you find yourself not overpaying. As you enter, a part of feet or part of you having this sort of exit designed for yourself in the front end is feeling assured within yourself of your individuality and not feeling that you need the deal to confirm your specialness. You don't need people to think that you're clever or rich or bright or a good businessman. You don't need to feel that you have to win or have to not lose. I think as you get more and more rounded within your personality, you don't become so combative or competitive with other people or with life. You more become combative with yourself. You look at those aspects of yourself that are weak and you try to strengthen them. You look at your strengths and you try to enhance them. But you're not intimately, again, involved in this whole idea of like winning and losing. You can win a few, lose a few. The most important thing is that you win most of them. And so as you enter in, you can diffuse this whole idea of linking the negotiation to your personal self-image. Once you have no more emotion about winning or losing, you're free. You don't have, let's say, a hidden agenda where you have to win because everybody back at head office is going to think you're an idiot if you don't win. The name of the game is to set it up at head office, whereby you say, look, I'm going to go and negotiate this deal on behalf of the corporation. I'm going to do the very best I can and understand that if I feel from my own judgment that we need to walk away, I'll walk away. And that allows you elbow room to get creative inside the deal and to have your exit pre-planned so that you're not structured into something that's uncomfortable or forces you to overpay. So many corporations harass or pressurize their executives into this whole performance function that the executives go into a deal with like a very limited time frame, very rigid structures where they have to create the deal or they have to make it work or come back and show everybody how clever they are. Otherwise, they're going to lose their job or people back at the head office are going to think they're idiots. If you are an employer of people that negotiate for you, you need to let them know up front that their job is not linked to the negotiation. You send the people out and you say, Harry, do the best you can, but understand that if you walk away, I will honor your decision and back you in the fact that you have walked away. And it isn't absolutely vital that we do this deal. There'll be another one along in a minute, so to speak. And that's the same thing in emotional negotiations. So often in our emotions or in our relationships with our fiancés, our loved ones, our lovers, our wives, our husbands, we always think that this is the ultimate relationship. You know, you always have to design relationships so that you can walk away. That honors you as an individual and it honors the other people. We used to say back in London that love was like the 49 bus, there'll always be another one along in a minute. And that's a fact of life, that there isn't anybody in your life that is absolutely indispensable once you are assured of your own individuality, of your own creativity, of your own craftiness. And when I say craftiness, I don't mean, let's say, sneaky tricks craftiness. I mean the craft of humanhood, your ability to move through the physical plane and make it work for you. As you look at this and you understand how to set up this thing in negotiation, you're obviously not going to allow people to manipulate you or to push you around, because any time that begins to happen in a negotiation, there you are, you've got your feet firmly ready to walk out. You have to think in terms of like feet first. And feet first means not plowing in regardless without looking at the facts. It's saying the most important thing in this negotiation is that I know where the fire exit is. I know how to get the heck out of here if it doesn't come together. And plus, I'm not going to go out like some kind of spoiled brat that's had his little nose tweaked. I'm going to honor the other person's decision not to conclude the deal, and I'm going to honor my own decision not to conclude the deal if it doesn't come together the way that I want it to come together. So often we create reasons for doing a deal, for making a purchase or making a sale, but we forget to create an equal number of reasons for not doing it. And that's important. So run through those points before you get into any negotiation. Do I have an exit? Do I have, a very large emotional attachment? Is my ego involved? Do I have to have it? Do I need the other people to confirm my specialness? Do I have a freedom and a fluidity in it? Have I been locked into a corner by the corporation or by the institution that I'm negotiating for, or my family members or my partners in the deal? What is my fluidity in this deal? And that, of course, is always the key to the psychology of negotiation, is the amount of fluidity or freedom that you can bring to it. And that, to me, I think is important. In most negotiations, sooner or later, you will be obligated to perform one way or another, to deliver the building or to deliver the money or contractual things that you've agreed to do. So before you take those steps, think through very, very carefully, do I want to be obligated? Are the obligations that I'm signing for things that I can deliver? Is it going to harass me and pressurize me? Is it going to make my life miserable or not? And if you're taking on an obligation or you're signing a contract, or even if it's just a verbal agreement with your mother-in-law to run around to the station, you need to decide whether or not that's what you want. And am I acting out of my own reality, my own, let's say, alternative philosophy, or am I acting out of somebody else's reality or acting to please them? The whole point about life is that everyone will try to obligate you and to stick you into a contract. And most times you will find that you don't have to sign a contract. If somebody says to you, well, you've got to sign this letter of intent to buy the building, all you have to do is say, no, I won't. I want to buy the building, and when I'm ready to buy it, I'll sign the contracts. But right now, I'm not going to sign anything at all. And people will say to you, well, if you want to secure this car, you'll have to put down a deposit. You can say, listen, I'm very interested in this car, but I'm not putting down a deposit. When I'm ready to buy it, I will walk around here with the money and I'll pay you. And so as you watch people trying to maneuver you into a contractual corner, don't allow them to. Always leave the door open for as long as you feasibly can do so. Obviously, at some point in a negotiation, you're going to have to come to agreement and sign the contract or do the deal. But why give away your freedom at the front end when you don't really have to? And so the whole thing about the feet is feet, F for feet and F for fluidity. Am I fluid? Am I free? Do I have the capacity to alter this deal at the 11th hour if I so wish? And of course, that's something that you have to retain for yourself as a right for as long as possible. Anytime you give away part of the fluidity, part of your ability to change, then you've got to be sure that the opposition or the seller or whoever it is also giving away a part of their fluidity, a part of their right to change. And so if you, let's say, for example, have been asked for a deposit, then you need to get them to contract to deliver or to contract to give you something in return for you giving a deposit. So you could say to the guy, okay, I will give you a deposit up front on this car, but I want you to throw in a free radio. And the guy will look at you like, you're nuts. But why give away your contractual right to walk away without him giving you something back? And so as you look at the negotiation, the pre-negotiation is negotiable. There isn't any part of it that is not negotiable. And if somebody's trying to box you in, you would only accept that box or that confinement if they in turn accepted some type of confinement that committed them. And so often we go into negotiations and we allow people to kind of railroad us through into this sort of situation that we never really wanted to get into. How many times have you walked into a car showroom and you weren't really interested in the car, or you were only vaguely interested and you were just looking through, and all of a sudden the salesman's writing up the sales sheet and he's getting you to sign some kind of commitment to buy the car? Well, at that point, you need to go beyond your embarrassment or the fact that you've taken up 45 minutes of the salesman's time and say to him, no, I'm not prepared to commit at this time. The mind is used to being put off, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment when we get to timing. But it's so easy to say to people, I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to commit at this time. So if somebody says to you, will you give me a ride to the station next Thursday? Why commit yourself? The name of the game is to say to them, well, call me Thursday morning, I'll let you know. And as you take on less and less obligations and less commitments, then all of a sudden you become more free. And I think that's really the name of the game. You're looking to become an absolutely free individual, free from, say, financial worries, free from emotional manipulations of others, free from, let's say, disease in your body, an individual that has this power, that has this strength to move through the physical plane, an individual that understands his or her self-worth and is assured about the way they move through life. As we look at this whole idea of feet, I think it would be appropriate here to just discuss for a moment family relationships and family negotiations. In a family situation, we're much, much more open to manipulation than we are, let's say, in a business scenario, because we have the feelings and the love that we share with our mothers and fathers, our brothers and sisters, our aunts and uncles, and so forth. However, again, within a family negotiation or within a family relationship, you need to stand for your own individuality. You didn't come here on the earth plane to keep them happy. You didn't come here to necessarily support them or not support them. You didn't come here to sort of be manipulated by their needs. And so I think that when you look at your family members, you can treat them as an individual, but at the same time, you have to honor their right to be sad, to be sick, to be poor, to be miserable, to be angry, to be negative, to be let down, to be not let down, to be happy, to be not happy, whatever it is. And you can say to a family member, I honor your decision to be upset with me, or I honor your decision to be jumping up and down on this particular situation. But you need to understand that that is not my reality. I love you, I respect you, but if you want to be like angry, then you go off someplace and be angry. I cannot be responsible for your emotional well-being, your emotional relationship to life or to me. And so when we can understand that people are basically in charge of their own reality, they create their own destiny, they have emotions which belong to them, you can create that detachment from your family members or those people that are close to you. And naturally, you're going to want to assist them to a point of strength. You're going to want to assist them to go beyond their upsets. But there is a point also where you may have to walk away. If you can't fix something, why drive yourself bananas trying to do it? You know, so often, let's say, for example, we'll have friends who are very, very opinionated, and they will have these very hard and strict and rigid rules about life. I mean, 10,000 rules more than likely. Well, imagine trying to tell that person, hey, here's another way of living. Here's a freer way of living. Here's a philosophy that is slightly oblique, slightly different, but it'll work really well for you. They won't listen. And how many times have you tried to change a friend or influence a friend or lead a friend to a more transcendent, happy lifestyle, and they just won't come? Why mess with it? I mean, why even bother with it? Allow that person that honor or that sacrosanct energy which says, I honor your decision to be a complete twit if you want, but don't engage me in it. If you want to be a complete twit, you go over there and be a complete twit, and when you're finished with it, come round here and we'll go to the pub and have a drink. And if they don't want to be, if they don't want to go beyond being a complete twit, then again, if you have feet, if you have this fluidity, you can quite happily allow people to walk away. As I said before, nobody is indispensable. There's nobody, there's no negotiation, there's no deal, there's no job, there's no marriage that is absolutely has to be once you feel assured within yourself. So in conclusion, on this section just on feet, remember this. Your reality is separate to everybody else's reality. Your reality is a part of your evolution, and it's a part of you becoming strong. You don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to like dampen down your feelings or accommodate people or tell white lies to keep them happy. You can come out of truth. And in the end, truth is the strongest path for you. If you don't like the dinner, you can say to your mother-in-law, I hate it. You know, she said, well, what do you think of the fish and chips? You say, it's utterly revolting, to tell you the truth, and I don't want to have any more fish and chips. Because rather than sit there every Sunday for like 10 years eating these fish and chips you can't stand, it's better that you tell her, listen, I don't like fish and chips, because more than likely she wants to accommodate you, wants to keep you happy, wants to entertain you, and she's happy to give you bacon and eggs instead. And so the more you can like float inside of yourself and become real, the more you can communicate with the world, the more you can actually tell them what it is you want, the simpler everything becomes, and also you create that sense of detachment. You are not necessarily expected to like everything your mother-in-law cooks for you, and she's not necessarily going to like everything that you do. But then who said you had to? And who said that you've got to necessarily even like her? And so we're looking at trying to create this separate reality and understanding that you are an individual and that you are detached. Let's move on now to another letter within the word prophet. And I'm going to jump past information and go to timing, because I think that timing is one of the sort of the psychological points that gives you the most power after the fluidity of being able to walk away. Everybody has their own time frames, and when you go into a deal or you go into a negotiation, they are going to want you to slot into their time frames. Everybody sort of wants you to show up with work on time, arrive on time, do this on time. And again, time is a thought form. Because somebody's reality says, I want you here at 4:30, does not necessarily mean that that has to be your reality. And so when you're looking at negotiation, the time or the timing of a negotiation is another one of those factors that is negotiable. Everybody will have deadlines. And one of the things you need to know about deadlines is that they can be broken. If the opposition or the opponents in negotiations say, all of this has got to be concluded by 3:30 next Thursday, make a point of calling that at the very front end. Make a point of letting them know that you are not in a hurry. That if the deal is concluded by next Thursday, 3:30, that's great. But if it takes 7 years, you're fine to hang around for 7 years. As you understand that, you push up against their deadlines, you take the high ground. You need to discover early on if they have a deadline. Once you know what their deadline is you're in a tremendously good position, because you can stall right up to the deadline. So you can waffle and be vague for hours and hours on end, and you'll know that as they get closer and closer to the deadline, the emotional content that they have invested in the deadline will force them to grant you concessions. And so what you're looking at is going into negotiations with no deadline and discovering theirs. And once you know that they have to do the deal by Friday, 2 o'clock, because the managing director is flying off for a weekend at the beach, then you wait until 10 to 2. You cause the delay to be right up against the deadline, and then you know that you will have the emotional high ground. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean that the deal will be concluded, but it allows you a point of strength. The mind likes to procrastinate. It likes to sort of put things off. And so if you, say, for example, are in the position of seller in a negotiation, then what you're going to want to do is to box the other person into a deadline. You're going to try to get them moved along so that you can commit them. And so when you're a seller and you're looking in relation to timing, you need to be ready to sell. The first point is that you have to, in your emotions, release the thing that you're trying to sell. It is hopeless to say sell a house if a part of your feelings or your wife's feelings or your kids' feelings is that you all love living there and you want to continue to live there for another 20 years. Because that subtle emotion inside of you will block you off from pulling the right person at the right time to buy that house. If you really want to sell the house, you begin to draw up the paperwork, leaving in the blank spaces to fill in the buyer's name, and you have it all ready to go when they come to the house. When they look around the house, you then need to begin to box them into an obligation, and usually they will take that obligation from you and they will sign the paperwork. And so as you're looking at timing, there are certain points to remember. The first one is that you should remember to buy slow and sell quick. Let me explain. You have all of the time in the world. You have the rest of your life. You don't have to run around like crazy. The best way to move through life is to walk slow. Don't run. When you go into negotiation, realize that if you are buying, you need to take your time. So often we make major purchases on the spur of the moment without really researching what the heck we're actually doing. And so if you are the buyer, make sure that you do it in a concerted way and that you give yourself all of the time in the world. There is no rush. When you are the seller, you're going to do exactly the opposite. You're going to want to put the buyer on a hurry-up. You're going to want to instill within the emotion of the buyer the need to go past his natural procrastination to conclude the deal. And so you will come up with things like, well, if you don't sign the paperwork today, you won't get the house because we've got another offer that came in this morning. And as soon as the paperwork arrives here, then obviously we'll have to take that offer. Or somehow you'll have to box the buyer into concluding the deal in a speedy fashion and not to delay things or procrastinate things. If you find that the buyer is delaying, then you have to put in whatever your best reasoning is to get him or her to move to the position where the deal can be concluded. But if you remember those words, buy slow, sell quick, you'll never get yourself into trouble. The other thing that I would like to mention as we're discussing time is the fact that people do not respect your time. They don't mind, let's say, wasting your time or telephoning you or basically dragging you through life at their disposal or at their reality. Whether you're in a negotiation or you're just trying to be an effective, let's say, homemaker, you need to get into absolute control of your own time frames. It's a bit like saying, I stamp my own reality upon my day. And that isn't very difficult to do because you can maneuver people so they slot into where you are when you are there so that it is convenient for you. Ideally, what you're trying to do is position yourself in the center of your life or in the center of your circle of activities and have life come to you rather than you go to it wherever possible. Once you get into that kind of discipline, you're beginning to negotiate time with people, and it grants you a tremendous advantage. And so if a person says to you, would you like to have lunch with me at 1 o'clock next Saturday? You don't necessarily have to be there at 1 o'clock for them to think you're a good person. You could say, no, I can't commit to 1 o'clock next Saturday. How about if we have lunch at midnight? Or whatever it may be. But you need to get into the habit of understanding that your time is valuable. And even if you're not necessarily working and making money or negotiating or doing deals, whatever, if you can win an hour or two off, you can spend that reading a book, working upon yourself, or just snoozing. Why have other people jerk you around with their time frames? The same thing, I think, happens a lot in offices where people can telephone you and interrupt what it is you're doing. You'll be working on a project and suddenly the phone rings and somebody will be calling you from goodness knows where about a totally different subject that isn't relevant. You need to be able to pick up that phone and say, I'm sorry, I cannot talk to you at this time. Call me next Thursday. Or you need to be able to cut people off. One technique that I use a lot in my office, and I've taught that to my staff, is the idea of when a person starts talking to you and you realize that they want to ramble on for hours and hours about what the weather's like in Darwin or something, you just say to them, excuse me a moment, and you put them on hold. Then you come right back to them and you say, I'm terribly sorry, I've got a long-distance call coming in from Tokyo. Could you call me later? And boom, and you've got them out of your day. The whole thing is that once you get into this whole idea of dominating your reality, this idea of this powerful individual, you are also going to negotiate time frames to suit yourself. And once you do that, you become more effective. You spend less time doing what I call busy work. You spend less time rushing around accommodating people. And more you design everything to come to you or to at least slot into how it's going to be reasonable or effective for you to operate inside that day or inside those hours that you've laid aside for whatever function you are going to be performing. As we look at timing, you can understand that you don't ever want to be in a deadline yourself when you're negotiating, but you always want to put the other people into some kind of deadline. If you can research what their deadline is, then you have the upper hand immediately. The final point I'd like to make about timing is this, that when we make investments, when we put our money into projects or we buy shares, the whole thing that you're looking at is winding up with a profit in the end. Okay? So often we look at the short-term view. We look at markets that go up hour by hour and they go this way or they go that way. And when you're in the short-term view, you're always in this tremendous emotional tangle that you don't have any control over. You don't have a control about whether the dollar's going up or gold's going down. But if you're looking at a long-term view with your negotiations, or if you're looking at a long-term strategy, you can look at the underlying fundamentals of a situation and say to yourself, how is this stock going to perform given a year or 2 years? And to guess a long-term view is a lot simpler than to guess what's going to happen to, let's say, gold between 11:15 and 2:30. And so as you look at the whole of this process of establishing a powerful financial future for yourself, the whole point of timing is to not react emotionally to a given situation, but to step back and to say, where is the consciousness going, given a number of months, given a number of years? If you're at the front end of a market and you're following the roller coaster, you'll more than likely be caught short. You'll be caught, let's say, out of the office for 3 hours when there's a panic in gold. And instead of calling your broker and selling, you're caught with holding a bunch of stocks or commodities that are going down. If you look at where is the consciousness of the people going? Where is the feeling going? Where are the attitudes going? Then all of a sudden you can develop a long-term strategy that will allow you to always be in the right place at the right time. Again, remember that when it comes to timing, you don't have to win them all. You just have to win most of them.
This is the end of the side. Please fast forward.